And so, without further ado, we're going to go ahead or I'm going to find the way to introduce Meridith Kohut. So Meredith is a freelance photojournalist, and she's been working on a lot of work, humanitarian issues, and global health issues in Latin America for both foreign press and one of her primary clients is the New York Times, doing a lot of work in Latin America and also Venezuela and the crisis there. She's been documenting the pandemic, of course, and also election work. Just some outstanding work from Meredith. She's gone through and pardon me, a little bit of live part. The dog was just outside and he's trying to get my attention, so I apologize for that, guys. I got a little distracted. Anyway, she's won a lot of fantastic awards, including the George Polk Journalism Award, Pictures of the Year Awards, Overseas Press Club, Courage in Journalism Award in 2018, Women's Media Foundation, and it goes on and on and on. And if I listed all of them, it would waste the entire hour. Well, it wouldn't waste it, but it would spend it. So without further ado, I want to introduce Meredith Kohut.
Hi, everyone. Well, man, that is really tough to follow. So many incredible photojournalists and presentations. So thanks for that, Rich. I also want to start off and say thank you to everyone who volunteers to make the Atlanta Photojournalism Seminar possible. There are so many just amazingly beautiful people who spend hours and weeks and months planning to make this possible, all volunteering. So thank you guys. It's really tough, of course, this year in the pandemic, and it's really special that, we've all been able to come together and figure out a way to make this work so that it can continue on this year. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, welcome. We're really glad to have you. The work that you've been doing that we're going to take a look at in Venezuela has been really just groundbreaking work and stuff, and being able to get information to the right people. I wonder if you wouldn't start out telling us a little bit more about, I don't know, how you got into this particular, what got you there?
So I moved to Venezuela about 6 months after I graduated college. At the time, it was one of the most prosperous democracies in all of Latin America. It has like the largest oil reserves in the world. As a young 20-something, it was great. We did stories about beauty queens and about oil, and we went to the beach every weekend, and it was just, a paradise to live at as a young journalist. Hugo Chavez was starting to make headlines for being a really fiery leader, really charismatic. He nationalized all of the oil companies, took them away from foreign companies, and said he was going to use all the country's oil wealth to help the people. And for years, he did a lot to lift millions of people out of poverty. And he was just really beloved. But years and years of having so much money, his government started to be very corrupt, and they started to control the economy in ways that led to food shortages, medicine shortages, and life for Venezuelans became increasingly difficult. Some of these first photos are all from assignments from the New York Times. When the crisis first started, people were really having basically just trouble finding certain food. The government put price controls on basic goods like coffee and rice and cooking oil and stuff like that. But it made it almost impossible to find. So like in the very first photo, you can see there's just hundreds of people waiting in line just to get one bag of like basic staple goods. Um, and then some of the, you can go a little bit slower, Rich, uh, or maybe go back a little bit to some of the families.
No, that's fine.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Just tell me where
Um,
to stop.
Maybe the first one with the refrigerator. Yeah.
Yep.
So
Okay.
that first photo is of one of the government supermarkets, and it was like that every day. Just hundreds of people waiting in line for, sometimes up to a whole day just to get one little grocery bag of food. This is the Cordova family. When I met them, they were really struggling with food insecurity, and they showed me their refrigerator, and this is the only food that they had in their entire house. It was a small bag of corn flour and eat that day, or how they're going to eat, the next day. Um,
Yeah.
Go next one. That's
Yeah.
that line. Mothers waiting up. That photo, people met before dawn and were waiting in line for hours at a pharmacy to hope that it might have baby formula. Baby formula was one of the things that was just impossible to find. That's a bakery. Bread and flour, super, super hard to find.
Yeah.
This is a meat market that's kind of a pop up. Um, Butchers would go and find, like the excess, like the byproducts, I guess, from meat shops, and they would take it to this little market in Zulia,
Oops.
and
Mm-hmm.
and like the meat there, it's completely unrefrigerated, and it was like the organs, the meat in between the bones, just stuff that you would never want to feed your family with, but it was the most affordable meat that you could get. One person there told me, back before the crisis started, I wouldn't even feed this to my pets, to my dogs. Like I would buy them better cuts of meat. He was just like indignant that he was having to buy it for his family to eat.
Yeah. Yeah. And the images you're presenting, they've got and this is something we talked about earlier, that earlier today, that there's this grittiness to it of obviously not just what you're seeing, but this reality of,
Yeah.
just trying to like convey what's happening. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit more, or sorry, talk a little bit more about, as you're doing this. This is, is there a toll that's happening with you?
Um, yeah, I mean, of course, being around suffering and people going through the worst days of their life, it definitely affects me emotionally.
Hmm.
But it's something that I I don't try to, like be that cold and neutral observer. Um, when I was studying photojournalism, one of the things that I thought when I was young was that, you really have to just be this observer and not feel anything or get emotionally involved. Um, and that's something that I've found the more I've done this type of work, is that it's just not true. Um, there's times when the photos are coming up a little bit later, but photographing children dying of starvation and being with their mothers through that, and everyone is crying because it's just the most heartbreaking thing to ever witness. A child suffering and dying like that. Um, and of course, if I feel the need that I need to cry, I will. And no one in the 8 years that I've been photographing this crisis, has ever told me, "Oh, you're not professional because you're crying." If anything, you know, they know that you really care and that you can empathize with them, and you're going through it with them, and I think it really helps with the photos because it makes people really start to trust you more and to feel more comfortable, and like they also don't have to pretend to be stronger than they really are feeling in that moment.
Yeah.
So this is from a story um, about severe malnutrition in children. When we were documenting the crisis, my editor David First at the New York Times, he gave me this really kind of dream assignment when the crisis first started, and people were just seeing that the crisis were like breadlines and people having to wait a while for food. And he called me up, in January of 2016 and said, Meredith, I feel like there's more to the Venezuelan crisis than the world really knows. So I just want to give you a whole year to go out and just explore, go all around Venezuela and figure out how the crisis is affecting people. It's got to be more than just breadlines. So I set off with the New York Times team in Venezuela, and that's exactly what we did. And in the next year, this is what we found was that kids were actually starting to die from severe malnutrition. And that's something that people see, and they know about now, but at the time it was just, unbelievable that Venezuelans from, such a prosperous country that kids would actually be starving to death. And the government was working very hard to cover it up. They had told doctors that they weren't allowed to put malnutrition on any of the babies' death certificates. Journalists were not allowed inside of hospitals. If you got caught with a camera inside of a hospital, you could be jailed, and arrested, and have your cameras smashed. And there were some journalists that got caught inside hospitals, and they were charged with foreign espionage and tortured. So it's really difficult work to do, but there were a lot of really, really brave doctors and incredibly brave families who were willing to, have it documented because they really wanted the world to know what was happening. And that first family, that was Gingerbread Merchan. We followed his family for a long time, for several weeks. And he was 17 months old when he died, and he weighed as much as a newborn. His mom, Carolina, she had gotten dengue and couldn't breastfeed him. And because she couldn't breastfeed and produce milk, and also because there wasn't any formula available, he just slowly died of malnutrition. This is the funeral from Cholera. He was another baby whose mom, Kelly, she also couldn't produce breast milk naturally. We met her in a hospital in Caracas and stayed with her family through Claver's last days, and then all the way through his funeral. They're from a really rural farming community outside of Caracas, and they did this really beautiful procession from their home to the cemetery, and it was incredibly emotional. That's Kelly, that's his mom, kind of in the center of the photo, and his dad is hugging the coffin.
Yeah.
And that's Gingerbread again. This photo just wrecks me. The little angel wings, it's Venezuelan tradition to put wings on babies' coffins when they pass away. And the family, they were really struggling financially because of the economic crisis. And, they didn't have the funds to really go and buy art supplies. So they made the wings out of the government clap box, which is like the government ration box. Um, the irony was just brutal. And that's Carolina and Mariangelis. That's Kinjiber's family. Kinjiber, who was in the Angel Wings photo, he wasn't the only one in the family who was suffering from malnutrition. His mother during this time only weighed 66 pounds. And his little sister right there is crying because she was so hungry. And she was just begging her mom to give her something to eat. I met this family in a soup kitchen in Los Teques outside of Caracas. The Catholic churches have really stepped up, and a lot of people have started kind of feeding centers for children. This is Oriana Caraballo. She, and the previous one of them sitting there, she's a single mom, and we just met her there doing basic soup kitchen photos, and the more we started talking to her, she just broke down, and she said, we're here and I'm feeding my kids, but just recently I tried to commit suicide because I just could not take the difficulty of trying to find food and trying to deal with the crisis anymore. She had gotten so far as to she put all of her children outside and had shut the door, and had hung something in her room to hang herself. And she said the only reason why I stopped was because her older son there on the left started banging on the door and just begging her to to let him be with her. And so she didn't go through with it, but she was working multiple jobs and going without food a day, 2 days at a time, just so that she can get her kids this one meal at the soup kitchen and whatever else she can find.
Yeah, I wonder if we wouldn't just take a little bit of a practical look at the work you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little obvious that you speak fluent Spanish. Am I wrong?
I would say I'm about 90%. Not perfect
Okay,
Spanish,
so
but
pretty
get by.
close. Pretty close. You can get by. Are you like, what are the logistics you're working with? Are you working with a fixer or translator? Are you working with with drivers? What are the things you're navigating? If we wouldn't mind taking just a couple moments to talk about that in order to continue this work.
Sure. So every story, every assignment is not the same. We really build our team and our approach depending on what we need to document. The New York Times has an incredible team in Venezuela. I work very closely with Isaín Herrera. That's who I worked with on most of this. She's just the most brilliant Venezuelan journalist, and has the biggest heart. Is extremely resourceful, and we really mesh really well when we work. My best friends. We have two different drivers who go out with people depending on who, what we're covering. Another photographer and another reporter, Anatoly, and a bureau correspondent named Julie. So there's a lot of people working behind the scenes. Most of our big stories, when we finish up and you go through all the audio and all the contacts, it's about 200 people per story that are not like on assignment for the New York Times. It's usually a correspondent, a reporter, a local reporter, and a driver and a photographer. But it really is like 200 people helping us, collaborating with us to make this story possible. To be able to make this photograph It was just, like I could walk into a soup kitchen and photograph her. But it took, the this was a Catholic soup kitchen. So it took the priest and the women who were cooking, and there were multiple people sitting all around us. We probably photographed 75 people in that day. Um, yeah. And then on top of that, you
So
have people with nonprofits who are helping, other families, people who might have a friend who's going through something hard, and they help you get connected with them. It's a lot of people working and collaborating to make stories like this possible.
right, and a question came up on the screen just a few moments ago, also about the logistics of just uh, basic needs for you to get met, and dealing with how you feed yourself and how the team feeds themselves. I wonder if you wouldn't mind just a moment talking about that.
Yeah, so I've actually lived in Venezuela for 12 years. I've lived the crisis, and it really doesn't matter, who you are, but when there's, you know, like, I haven't gotten to many of the photos yet, but as far as food, yes, I can get food. There's still nice areas of the capital Caracas where you can go and go to restaurants that are accessible if you earn in dollars and foreign currency. And especially when the food crisis was really bad, I was regularly flying in and out, to go cover stories in other countries. So I would leave with the bare minimum and take these two huge bags and just fill it up, with food and toiletries and medicine and anything that anyone needed, and just basically pack it in.
Yeah.
The main thing is, you can find food in Venezuela. It's not that there's no food. It's just that the government has set up the economy to where the currency is, basically worthless. Doctors and people working in state hospitals, their salaries are only worth, a few dollars, less than $10 a month. Teachers, their salaries, what they're worth because of the government's, manipulation of the currency and devaluations, it's like $2 a month. It's just extremely difficult to live on. So even if there are shops that could have food, there's not a lot of variety, but it's just they don't have the purchasing power to buy it. Because the food, if it's not, the clap boxes and the government subsidized food, it's sold at, regular prices, what it would be sold for in Colombia or in Peru. Um, but people's salaries are just, you know, you people say all the time, with I can work an entire month and I can only buy like, one or two bags of small rice, or, one carton of eggs.
Okay. So I'm going to continue going through the images as well. So we can
Yeah. So
keep
this was a
talking about
story we
some of the
just did,
locations.
this year in January and February. Um, you know, uh, Being a mother in Venezuela is incredibly hard. Um, the hospitals are so collapsed that, they don't have basic supplies like IV fluid or antibiotics, just things that are incredibly basic. And one of the stories that's been on my whiteboard for years that I could never figure out the logistics of how to do it is maternity. You hear stories of women. They say it's like the roulette, like Russian roulette. Basically, they'll go, when they're in labor, and just go into to hospital and hospital, and they'll get turned away, because each hospital will say, I don't have an X-ray machine to do what you need, or we don't have an empty or we don't have Clorox to sanitize the operating room, and you need a C-section. It's just nonstop. So the woman in the first photo, we followed her as like the main protagonist for our story. Her name was Milagro. She's 20 years old, and she went. We followed her for more than a day and a half while she was in labor, and she got turned away. It was 6 different hospitals, 5 or 6. And it was just, this was the last hospital that she went to, and they denied her again. And she was so far along, and she was just so exhausted, she passed out. That's her mom right there. After she passed out, and she was just screaming and pleading for them to, to let her in and to help her. And unfortunately, her baby died. It was born, and then the baby died the next day. And that was inside of another hospital that was run by the government, and the really brave director of maternal health snuck us inside and took us into the OR so that we could be there documenting when women were giving birth. And it's just like that. They had no monitors, nothing for pain, nothing to monitor what the health of the baby or anything like that. We were really lucky that the moms who were giving birth that day, they decided that they wanted to tell the story. And a lot of people tell me, like, oh, that's really brave work that you're doing. We face a lot of repression from the government down in Venezuela, but even though it's hard for me, it's so much harder for the people who are in the photographs. And that's one of the main things that I try to get people to understand, I guess, is that, everyone who participates in a story like this, when you're working in a country where the government doesn't want these truths to be seen, these doctors could be arrested just for letting a journalist come in. These mothers could get their food rations and their monthly, clap box taken away from them if they're accused of, speaking out against the government. So every time that we do a big story like this, we have to put so much care, and it takes a lot of time to decide who we're going to write about and who are going to be, the families who are going to be the face of whatever element of the crisis we're showing. It takes an incredible amount of bravery, and they all do it because, they really believe in they really believe that if people could actually see what's happening in Venezuela, that they would send help and they would help to stop it. That is by far the number one reason why people agree to have their families and to have these incredibly difficult and sensitive situations, not only documented, but documented and put on the front page of the New York Times and seen by so many people.
So you're actually taking very important care right now to not share too much about your sources or about access, because of all the potential repercussions that might happen to them.
Yeah, I mean, every story is different. This director of the pregnancy wing of the hospital was just, full in. She had been working like this for years. They'd never let any journalists in. And Issa Yin, the local reporter, she talked to dozens of hospitals and dozens of, maternity doctors, and everyone was afraid to do it until she, we keep knocking on doors until someone, wants to do it. And then, we found this doctor, and she said, yes, come in. I'm going to help you come in. You're going to be my guest. And help get the staff to trust us. And then we had to talk, of course, to the moms, and make sure that they understood and that they wanted to participate. There were 2 mothers who wanted to do it. There were a lot of other women who understandably I would never ever let someone photograph me for the New York Times when I am giving birth. But these two women were incredibly brave, and they really do it so selflessly, and they do it because they want things to get better. And um, I don't know. I just really wish that people who read news stories like that, would recognize and appreciate how much people are sacrificing and risking themselves so that we can become informed citizens.
Yeah. So the next images go into a different body, a different set of work. Am I wrong? Just continuing
Yeah.
more in
So these,
hospitals and the apparently squalid, uh,
yeah. So we're flip flopping a little
yeah,
bit. So this was one of the first hospital stories that we did, and when we did it, it was no one had gotten cameras inside to really document the conditions. The hospitals are so locked down and so difficult to access, and really photograph places like this. This was an ER, like the operating room of an ER, kind of like the trauma center where they bring people in when they first arrive. Um, and my editor had told me to go around and really try to find stories that were untold. At this time, people were only documenting or really talking about like the breadlines and the lines for food. No one had even started reporting on how people in hospitals were being affected, or that the medicine shortages. Um, and the government called that first photo of the ER room, fake news. And there's a story behind it. We also had doctors who brought us in, and to go inside of a hospital in Venezuela, it takes dozens of collaborators to you know to help you navigate and be there. Can you go back one to the stories about the other one?
certainly, yeah,
Yeah, um, this was like one of the most important photos to really start the conversation of how the crisis was affecting the hospitals and healthcare and access to medicines. Um, we had dozens of doctors and a local opposition politician who helped us gain access to this hospital. There were soldiers, there, and you can kind of go into a hospital, but once you take out a camera, that's when you can really get into trouble. Um, and we're foreigners, and being in the hospital, it was we definitely looked at a place. Um, so there were soldiers following us around for hours, basically saying that we couldn't be there, and trying to intimidate us so that we would leave. And so I knew, I had like one chance to make an important photograph, and talked to the doctors, and we decided, like, what would be like the definitive kind of like iconic photo that would you know talk about how the crisis is affecting hospitals. And they said, well, when someone comes in and they're severely injured, and we don't have the resources to save their lives and to take care of them. And that was half a day before this photo was taken. And I went and hid with Nick, the correspondent, up on an upper floor, like in a small back room, and we stayed there for hours until the doctors had a case come in that kind of fit that profile of how they thought we could best tell this story. And the soldiers had all been alerted. They all knew that we were inside the hospital. And then they came up, and it was like kind of like a movie. Like, this group of incredibly brave doctors like went up to the upper floor, and we walked down, and they just like were all around me. um like I was just in the middle of this group of them, and they marched down, and they opened up these kind of like flapping doors, and they stood in front of it, and they blocked it, and they kind of like pushed me in. And I had less than a minute just inside there with this man. And, really, really quickly, I said, you know, I'm a journalist, not supposed to be here. I'm trying to tell the story of what it's like inside the hospitals. These photos will never help you. But, is it okay? And he was so like serene and calm and, didn't really move at all. He'd been stabbed multiple times in the abdomen and they didn't have, anything to take care of him with. And he just kind of like laid his head back and he's like, yeah, do it. And he said like, tell the world. And I just, snapped a few frames really quickly and then ran out. The doctors were blocking the door and we had a local reporter kind of posted up. So we ran out and I slipped her the SD card, um, you know, quickly so that if I got caught, at least they wouldn't be able to erase the photographs. So she went, took the SD card, ran straight to the truck. We had a car outside, like on and running and ready to go. And the doctors, like, we went down through the basement and like out through the morgue and, pretty much ran out and had to jump straight in the car and, while it was moving. So
Yeah.
that is
It's
what
okay to
life
take a breath.
in
It sounds like there's a lot of
hospital
emotion in your
was
voice right now.
like. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
still really hard to look at.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I feel like, it was a way to honor him and his life. And, he didn't, I don't know what happened to him because I had to leave, like that. But it just, like we were talking about before, it really shows the bravery of what people do to kind of get the message out in hopes that people will care about what's happening in Venezuela and, and try to help and try to, like Beth said, hold those in power and especially those who are abusing their power accountable.
Yeah. So I'm going to continue going through some of these other images, also in hospital.
Yeah. This is a pharmacy. Over 90% of medicines that you can find in most drugstores, you can't find in Venezuela. No matter, you could be a millionaire and you still can't find the medicines.
Yeah.
Again, the really brave doctors being resourceful. Those were healing broken legs with, jugs of water. That's Yulitsa. She's a 15-year-old with cancer that couldn't get the cancer treatment that she needed.
Yeah. It just continues to, all of this whole group of images, this whole body of work of the hospital coverage just illustrates how squalid the conditions were. I mean, I know I used that word before, but just how terrible
So this is
and how difficult it was for people who didn't have finances.
Yeah, and it's not like they're, jobless. These are people who are working 1, 2, 3 different jobs. But can you imagine, how would you all take care of your families if, you're only making $2 or $3 a month? The doctors, they couldn't even pay their bus fare to get to work with what they were making, and they're, surgeons. So once we did the first kind of general public hospital coverage, really started to explore that because at the time, there just wasn't anything reported on how people were being affected by these drug shortages. And I was at one hospital and got a tip from another doctor, and she said, you think we have it bad. One of my friends works in a government psychiatric hospital, and when people don't have their medicine, like their lives completely change. So we started again, just reaching out to, tons of different hospitals around the country, and so many said no. And then finally, we got a yes for this hospital. It's El Pampero in Barquisimeto. The governor at the time was an opposition politician. Hold on that story on that photo right there.
Oh, this one
And
here.
yeah,
Okay.
that's Cleo. And we finally had help getting access. This was one of the hospitals that was run by the state, and the state was run by a politician who wasn't a member of Maduro's Socialist Party. And they, same thing. 90% of their medicines they just didn't have because of the crisis. They were completely impossible to access. And when we went, it was by far some of the most difficult scenes of the crisis that I've seen. We met this woman. Her name's Cleo. She's a schizophrenic, and her roommate. It's like a live-in hospital. Most of these people had or wards of the state because their families couldn't keep them medicated or take care of them, and so they were living in this government facility and unmedicated, and people who I went back several times and spent weeks documenting them, and it was really incredible to see how people changed when they had access to their medicines or they didn't. They would divvy up the few pills that they had and decide who needed them the most. And if you go back to I definitely want to talk about Cleo under the mosquito net. And so Cleo's a schizophrenic, and she her roommate was also schizophrenic, and neither of them were getting medicine because of the rationing. And we met Cleo. She has a bandage over her nose because a few hours earlier her roommate had had an episode because she didn't have her medicine, and she'd attacked her, and she'd bitten off of her nose and eaten it and swallowed it. And the staff rushed her to the local emergency room in another, like the government hospital, and she needed full reconstructive surgery, but they didn't have any supplies. All they could do was put this bandage on her nose.
Yeah. So as we continue going through some of these other images, there was a question that rolled up on the screen. You're not compensating these people. No one's getting compensated for the work that you're doing and their generosity of being photographed or reported on.
No. It's unethical to to pay people to be documented or interviewed or included in a news story.
Right.
Everyone does it just out of the kindness of their hearts, and more than anything, they they really want the world to know the information. They want the world to see what they're going through, because like I mentioned earlier, they almost everyone who we talk to about doing these types of stories, they say, I want to collaborate because I want people to know, and I believe people will care, and when they care, they'll help.
So the compensation is hopefully altruism.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone has different motivating factors. Definitely the doctors and the patients. For years they've seen their patients die unnecessarily. People dying because they don't have just the most basic, medical supplies, and the doctors say regularly. They say, I know how to save this person's life, but I just don't have the supplies, and I have no way of getting it.
Another question flashed on the screen from Tracy Rice. She asks if being American worked for or against you while doing this work.
With regular Venezuelans, it made no difference. The anti-American sentiment is more from the government and the rhetoric. Before we ever thought about the phrase fake news, in Venezuela, I'd worked for years with the government accusing us of the guerra mediática, the media war, basically claiming the same thing, that we were in making all this up, that it was all Photoshop, that these weren't photos from Venezuela. They would accuse us of all kinds of things. They would put my photo on state TV and say that I was a spy, or when we were working in the hospitals, I got detained by the intelligence service, and they accused me of trafficking baby organs, and said that they were going to, that they could prove it, because they're able to manipulate the courts and put me in jail for forever. I've been shot at close range with buckshot. I've been detained. I've been beaten, punched in the face. It's definitely tough, but I don't think it's because I'm American. It's just because I'm a journalist, and I'm exposing injustices and human rights abuses that are very much happening, and the people who are responsible for them don't want people to know that. So I can go back a little bit. Yeah. So we skipped over quite a bit, but
gold mine. It's okay.
Sure. One of the the crisis is really bad. It's hard to find food. It's hard to find medicine and medical care, and we found that Venezuelans were kind of dealing with it in different ways. And one of the ways was that they were going to these illegal gold mines out in Bolivar State, because the currency, there's like massive hyperinflation. So you could get paid and put your money in the bank, and then in a week or 2 weeks, it would be worth only half of that. So people were really, they didn't want to keep cash or anything in bolivars. So people started flocking to these illegal gold mines. We met people who were engineers, who were teachers, had regular jobs in the cities, and they came to the gold mine because they wanted to earn in gold because it could hold its value, and it would pay a lot more than people were making in bolivars.
Mm-hmm.
So some people went to the mines. Other people decided to flee. That's what this story is starting at. I spent weeks with these women. They had begged a local mafia guy to smuggle them alongside these small boats, like you see there in the left. They were, smugglers who were smuggling arms and cocaine to Aruba and the islands off the coast of Venezuela. And when the crisis started to get really bad, people started begging them to put them in the boats and smuggle them also to Aruba. And when we did this story, it was kind of like mid to end of 2016, and it was a huge story. It was on the front page of the New York Times because it was just absurd to think of people like fleeing Venezuela. That was such a prosperous country before. And luckily, I was able to get access to this group of migrants, and I spent weeks with them waiting for the right time for the boat to leave, and negotiated access with the mafia to allow me to be in there and sleep in their safe house with them so that I could show that people were actually fleeing the crisis.
Yeah, so you're negotiating with. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'll let you go ahead.
So a lot of families got broken up because of this, and these are two stories that we did earlier this year about like the children left behind from parents who had to migrate to to work abroad and send money back home. The first story is the first photo before that. I guess two more back.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a family whose mom had just left to go work in Colombia. And then the next one is from a Catholic charity who had, most of the girls staying in this boarding school run by some really amazing and kind Catholic sisters, um, were taking care of them. They were having a pajama party movie night, and almost all of them had parents who had to go abroad to work. Yeah. I love that last photo.
Mm-hmm.
So, some people went to the gold mines. Some people decided to flee or go work abroad, and a lot of people decided to stay and fight back and take to the streets and protest. Um, most of There were really frequent protests in 2014 and then also in 2017. Almost every day, just thousands of people would take to the streets and protest, and then they would usually end up um, with clashes between protesters and security forces.
Yeah. And again, one of the things as we keep going, I mean, this is not for the faint of heart. One of the things that we talked about earlier today was that you take time. You let you allow yourself to feel. That's something that you mentioned earlier as well.
Yeah, you know, mental health is definitely a very real struggle for a lot of us that cover humanitarian type stories and human suffering, and a lot of really good friends of mine have have really struggled with it. I've struggled with it myself. But one of the main things that I try to do is just really let myself feel, um, you know, whatever I'm feeling in the moment, and just channel it back into the work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and at the time when we were covering these protests, just looking at these photos now, it's incredible to just you know think of everything that was happening in 2017, and then now what's happening here in the States, and you're seeing scenes just like this.
Mm-hmm.
As we were getting hit by a water cannon. And this guy, he'd made
So
his own kind of protective vest out of carpet. And he kind of rolled up to me, and, I was dressed in full body armor and protective gear. And, he was kind of making fun of me. And, and I asked him, had like, how efficient is your vest? And he's like, don't knock it. It's actually saved me multiple times. Um, there were there are a lot of young kids that were killed during the protests.
yeah,
And
and
like the most
again, I mean,
common
here you are.
most common
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
one of like the takeaways, I guess, of why were they taking to the streets. They were all struggling. Their families were struggling with food and work and insecurity. And I would ask them, like, why are you protesting? Of course, as journalists, and it's dangerous. Dozens of people are dying and getting killed because they're out here protesting against the government, and so many of them, their response was essentially like, I'm gonna die either way. Um, if it's not from hunger, or because I can't get the medicine that I need, or the hospital care that I need, or violence just skyrocketed because the crisis was so bad and so many people were desperate. And they just said, I'd rather, if I'm gonna die, I'd rather die fighting. And it
So that
just,
brings it just. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, it just really shows kind of like that. It like that was all that they had left. There was no like plan B. They'd already run through all of their options, and tried to make it work. And when they couldn't, they just decided to take this to the streets. And they were trying to make the government fall. They really wanted Maduro to resign. And someone more competent and ethical to take over, because the Maduro regime has really, just completely looted the country.
Yeah, it kind of brings with the last 4 minutes that we have, it brings me to think of another thing that we talked about, which was not just purpose for the people you're documenting, but purpose for yourself and purpose to continue not just this work, but all the really tough work that you do.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely why I got into this profession. I'm not here to make like beautiful photographs. I see journalism, and especially photojournalism, as a tool, to shine light on injustice. And I definitely, I'm in this because I want to fight against injustice, and I want to hold people who are committing human rights abuses or abusing their power. I want to be part of the people who are holding them accountable and standing up for people who are suffering, especially at the hands of people who are corrupt and abusing their power.
Hmm. So if there's that last message that you can provide the viewers, particularly the younger journalists out there, what's that message, Meredith?
It's a hard, it's a very hard profession, but it's very, it's a great way to dedicate your life to doing something important that matters. Um, you're never going to be rich. It's really hard to have relationships and have much of a personal life, but um, you know, I feel like I want to be doing something that gives back and helps people, and that's one of the reasons why I've decided to do this type of work, and especially focusing on the humanitarian side of photojournalism. Um, yeah, know that it's going to be hard, but if it's really what you want to do it.
Yeah. And the current situation in Venezuela, you haven't been there in a minute. What is the current situation to round this out and close this work up right now for you?
Yeah. So the pandemic, thank God, it hasn't hit too hard in Venezuela. They've locked down the country since spring. I was working on a reporting trip abroad when they locked down the country, so I've been stuck outside here in my very benevolent parents' home in Texas, who they've given me kindly given me refuge for, while I've been covering the pandemic and the wildfires and stuff like that. But my team is still there, and I talk to them regularly. And basically, they're on lockdown. You've seen the state of the hospitals. So if COVID really takes off there, it's going to be extremely detrimental, and a lot of people are going to die unnecessarily. So the government, at least they have taken like the hardcore lockdown decision. They're keeping people inside. They have soldiers posted out and curfews, and they're not letting people really move around. So it hasn't gotten that bad, but God forbid if it really does start to spread down there, it's going to be tragic.
Yeah. Well, Meredith, allow me to say thank you very, very much for joining us, for sharing your incredibly important work, but also in continuing to do the incredible important work that you're doing here in the States for now, and of course, wherever. We appreciate your vision. We appreciate your sharing it with all of our viewers and the seminar in our 48th year. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, it's this is the first year I've been working in the U.S., and especially after 12 years in Venezuela and seeing all this happen, it's really concerning to see so much of the same things that happened in Venezuela happening here. Um, when it happened in Venezuela, people really weren't paying attention because it happened slowly. It's never just one big event when your democracy collapses. It happens in small increments. The same thing in Venezuela, with elections, like people casting doubt on elections and the courts being stacked and discrediting the media. That all happened incrementally there. And then, before we knew it, like, democracy was gone in Venezuela. So,
Yeah.
I really encourage everyone out there, everyone working, keep documenting this, keep holding those in power accountable, and, keep photographing truth.
Thanks so much, Meredith. We loved having you.
Bye, guys.